So, welcome back. It's, well, for me, it's been almost a week since I've recorded anything dealing with PvP. And there's a reason that today's episode is brought to you by Grape Energy Drink. Because without Grape Energy Drink, I wouldn't have made it through a very, very deep sickness. Stomach bug, whatever you want to call it. Without going into graphic detail, I was basically exploding from both ends for like 3 days straight. So in my narcissistic little mind here, today's video is kind of a big one because today's video kind of captures all of the research that I've been doing all month long, well, for the past several weeks. All of the research that I've been doing kind of leads up to this video. And okay, so let me get this out of the way first. There are several people that are complaining about the top 5 that I've chosen for. There's a couple here, a couple here, a couple here, a couple here, whatever. Like there's a couple of complaints in most areas, and that's fine. I think that calling me out on stuff makes me double check myself. Plus, it makes me kind of stand my ground. And to address a lot of those, number one, Dugong and Charizard were like the biggest ones that everybody complained about. First thing that I gotta say is that to be in this top 5 of each typing really means a lot. And I don't think that I stressed it well enough to begin with, that each one of these Pokemon are up here for a very good reason. And I didn't mean to come across as trying to downplay any of these Pokemon at all. A lot of people took it as I was saying that Dugong sucks. No, I wasn't trying to get that point across. I was just trying to say that Dugong doesn't do nearly as good of a job as Lapras or as Celio. A lot of people thought that I downplayed Charizard, but I wasn't trying to downplay Charizard. I feel like Charizard has a different place in the meta than all of these other 5. While he's good at what he definitely does have a place in the meta. I wasn't trying to downplay him by any means by trying to say that he was bad or by trying to say that he wasn't useful or anything like that. I didn't mean for it to come across that way, and I apologize if it did. So let's get into the interesting part of today's video. So today we're actually going to be looking at what team do you kind of build to take into your Kingdom Cup. Well, there's several different ways that you can do this. And to do this, a lot of people are looking towards a specific core team that you should build. So in terms of the Kingdom Cup, you can kind of fall back on this one little acronym here, B.A.L.L. So taking in B.A.L.L as your core, being a Bastiodon, Altaria, Lucario, and Lapras core team, and that leaves you with 2, that leaves you with 2 open slots to take into the cup. And you can kind of fill those with what you think your local teams are kind of going to have. So in a scenario where you just hardcore go after the ball meta, let's say you have Bastiodon, Altaria, Lucario, and Lapras. You cover a ton of stuff with that team. So what should you kind of be on the lookout for? Well, if we know that Lucario is kind of the man to beat, it might be worthwhile to go for something that has really favorable matchups against Lucario. Something like Alolan Marowak. Or something like Charizard, actually. Charizard has really good matchups against Lucario, resisting a lot of his fighting damage and being able to output a ton of damage back. So with either of those 2 chosen on your team, that kind of leaves you open to one more pick. And if you really wanted to, you could go with something that kind of helps you cover Bastiodon. So you could end up covering with Flygon or maybe even Steelix there. Both of those really do end up having favorable matchups against Bastiodon in certain scenarios, so you could end up doing a really hardcore meta team with something like Bastiodon, Altaria, Lapras, Lucario, Alolan Marowak and Flygon, or Steelix and Charizard. Both of those I think would do really, really well in the meta, and actually you would be running a very top tier, pretty much top tier team, which there's nothing wrong with that. But as most of you guys know, I don't really like to conform to the social norms. I don't like to have just ball meta. I don't like the cookie cutter type deal. I want to just flat out explore something totally different. So let's do that. What I have written down are 6 Pokemon that I think work in a similar fashion, but it's kind of like, let's say your scenario is, I want to start with a Pokemon, either A, because it's legacy, B, because I've already invested in it, C, because it's my favorite Pokemon. Whatever the reason is that you want to start with this Pokemon, let's say we just start with it. So here's my idea. Let's actually start with one of the Pokemon that a lot of people had problems with in the Ice-type video, being Dugong. Let's say that we have Dugong and we want to use it. Well, Dugong's best moveset is actually Ice Shard, Ice Wind, and Water Pulse. So you end up having a little package here that does really well up against the dragons like Altaria and Flygon. You do end up being really good against fire like Typhlosion and Charizard, but you have a pretty big weakness to most of the steel Pokemon, especially all 5 of these steel type Pokemon. So, what Pokemon actually ends up doing really good against those 5 steel types? Well, kind of see where I'm going here. You can kind of build your team based off of whatever weaknesses you carry. So, what actually does really good up against these 5? Flygon. So Flygon actually does really well if you take Mudshot, Earthquake, and Stone Edge. You actually end up having really favorable matchups to all 5 of these 5 steel types. And then you actually have a really, really good matchup against all of the fire types, like literally all of the fire types in the cup. You have really good matchups against all of those. But you do have a problem with dragons and ice types. Things like Altaria and Dragonair from this 5 all do really good up against you. And actually, all 5 of those ice types end up hurting you. So, let's start to tear that down. Well, to tackle the dragons, we can actually go with Steelix here. Steelix actually having Dragon Tail, Earthquake, and Heavy Slam can actually end up doing really good up against the dragons. And he actually does good up against all of them except for Flygon, but kind of need to cover the other ones as well here. If you remember, Dugong had really good matchups against both Altaria and Flygon. Flygon ends up losing to Altaria and Dragonair, so we kind of need something to answer this Altaria here. Steelix does pretty good with that, so Steelix actually being good up against all of these except for Flygon puts us in a good position. Plus, he actually does pretty good up against most of the steel types here except for Lucario. He can do pretty bad up against that. But then what's Steelix's big weakness? Actually, Steelix has a unique weakness in this cup being water. So we kind of need to help cover something that is going to be using water. Which, remember, a lot of these ice types here are going to carry that dual water type. So water is really what hurts us, but it's the ice typing that we're having problems with. So, what can actually help us up against those water and ice typings? Actually, Melmetal does pretty good here. So, Melmetal with Thundershock, Flash Cannon, and Rock Slide actually does really good up against the ice water types. Everything but Pillow-Swine can really, Pillow-Swine actually gets to Melmetal a little bit, but other than that, you can kind of cover all of those ice types up there. But Melmetal has a really hard time with the fighting types, like Lucario and Blaziken. So, what can we actually do to get rid of the Lucario and Blaziken matches here? Well, you can kind of go for an Altaria to be on your team. Altaria actually does extremely well up against all of the dragons and all of the fighting types that are available in the cup. Altaria does perfect against all of those, except Altaria ends up losing to a lot of the ice types here and a lot of the rock throwers like Bastiodon, Macargo, Pillow-Swine. Those guys that end up having rock type moves can really end up hurting you. So what does really good up against ice and rock? You'd never guess, but it'd definitely be Lucario. So that's kind of the off meta kind of way that I'm trying to instill a way to build a team. You don't necessarily need to have that ball core meta, which, yes, meta is meta for a reason. I'm not ever going to deny that. But I don't think that there's only one way to look at the meta. I mean, if you guys look at last month when I was in the Tempest Cup, I chose to just completely go against the Razor Leaf pick. And that's just because one, I wasn't super impressed with any of the Razor Leafers that I could have access to. And two, I knew that everybody else would be using Razor Leafers, so I could kind of play around that. So you can kind of see there's not just one clear-cut way to build a team. Yes, there is a meta, and yes, it is meta for a reason, but if we can play far enough ahead in our game, we can actually beat that meta with an anti-meta. And you know what? Screw doing 2 videos. Let's just do it right here. Countering the ball meta should be fairly simple off the top of the head, so let's see how far we can get down this rabbit hole here. So our first letter is B for Bastiodon, and Bastiodon's easily countered by things that have ground type moves and can really just withstand its crazy bulk by just outputting tons and tons of damage while hopefully resisting some of his damage that he's dealing. Things like Flygon do really, really well up against him. Even Steelix and Empoleon are decent counters to Bastiodon in a no-shield situation. So let's say going up against Bastiodon, we're going to have Flygon, I think, is a really safe pick, and shoot, let's just go with Empoleon to see how we go here. Our next letter is A for Altaria, and Altaria is really end up being hurt by a lot of the ice types and even some of the rock throwers in the meta, so we kind of want to focus our efforts on getting a ton of ice type damage primarily, considering that he's going to be double weak to ice. And then having a nice resistance, if possible, to any of that damage would be great. But it's kind of hard to have some resistance to Dragon. So, let's see what we got. So, out of the Pokemon on the board, the 2 Pokemon that end up doing probably the best against Altaria with our restricted use case here is probably Piloswine and Melmetal. So, going completely up against the ball meta, not having Bastiodon, Altaria, Lucario, or Lapras at all on our team, I think Piloswine and Melmetal are probably our 2 better options there as far as Altaria counters. Our next letter is L for Lapras, and Lapras, as we've seen in all of the Great League Cups so far, Lapras is just a huge hurdle to have to overcome. And Lapras ends up having a really nice package with water and ice typing, being able to output fast charge moves like Surf with Water Gun and having a Legacy Ice Beam in its pocket if possible to actually output tons of ice type damage really makes it a huge threat in this cup. So what on the board actually ends up doing pretty well up against Lapras? Well, staying away from the ball, we actually have Kingdra doing pretty good, and actually Melmetal does really well up against it as well. But since we've already chosen Melmetal, let's actually go with Celio here. So we know that Celio can actually end up beating Lapras in certain situations, and Kingdra here actually doing really well with a ton of neutral damage as far as Dragon-type moves go. So let's stick with Celio and Kingdra there. Our next letter is L for Lucario, and of course this is your big one. So out of all the Pokemon that are up here, which ones actually do best against Lucario? Lucario's the most difficult one to kind of plan for, and it's just because his raw damage output with Power Up Punch and being able to just completely clobber certain Pokemon really make him a huge threat. But you do actually have a decent chance up against Lucario, especially if you maybe run Charizard and possibly even Blaziken. So we know that Blaziken having access to counter can really end up setting up some really interesting matches against Lucario, especially when you factor in shields. There is a pretty good chance that Blaziken can actually end up beating Lucario, and Charizard does really well in that scenario too because of the resistance to the fighting type damage with his flying type. So let's go ahead and do Charizard and Blaziken as our 2 to counter Lucario. Now, out of all of the Pokemon that we wrote down, Flygon, Empoleon, Piloswine, Melmetal, Celio, Kingdra, Charizard, and Blaziken. Out of all 8 of those, we have to narrow down 2 of them to kind of weed out. And honestly, I think I kind of think that Empoleon and Kingdra have an interesting duo here, because I don't know if either one of them is really considered better than the other, but in terms of just countering the core meta, Empoleon may end up having some better resistances compared to Kingdra, considering Kingdra has the dragon typing on it. Kingdra may be the easier one to just let go and actually end up using Empoleon here. In the other side, Piloswine actually maybe end up easier to let go of rather than Celio as far as an ice type. I think Celio being able to beat both Lapras and Altaria is really good, while Piloswine not doing nearly as good up against Lapras. So I definitely think that that would maybe end up being a reason to drop Piloswine. Other than that, Celio, Empoleon, Flygon, Charizard, Blaziken, and Melmetal. Does that sound anti-meta or what? While that is of course not the most ideal team for the Cup by any means, it is a way to kind of take a look at a direct counter to the meta and try to make some choices that, if you maybe don't have the Ice Beam Lapras, or maybe you don't have a Lucario or a Bastiodon, or maybe you just don't have the dust to spend on a second move for Melmetal, it could end up being a really niche way to kind of counter your meta, and it could end up working. I'm not saying that this is the end-all be-all team that you should go to a tournament with, but I'm saying that take this concept and this idea to your planning stage and sit down and make a team that ends up countering things really well. You don't necessarily have to be the meta to beat the meta, but you do have to be a step ahead of the meta to beat the meta. That's all I'm trying to say. So with that all said, I do want to have a couple of closing thoughts. So of course I know that most of my research is not necessarily orthodox, it's not necessarily the norm, it's not generally what most people look at. I tend to pay attention to more of the numbers more than anything. While my research is not necessarily the norm or very orthodox in any way, I try to think outside the box. I try to do things differently. I don't want to be a copycat of any other YouTuber or anything like that. I try to do something halfway original, as much to my ability as I can, and try to bring you guys a unique perspective. I don't necessarily say that my perspective is the best by any means. Of course, if my perspective was the best, I would have won every single cup so far. I've not won a single cup so far, and I'm not ashamed to say that. I'm having fun while I play. That's all I really want you guys to do. And maybe the hardcore, like, competitive people, you know, I'm sorry. I am extremely competitive at heart. Yes, I do want to win, and when I go for something, I do go for the gold. But I don't try to stick to everyone else's plan to get to gold. I want to pave my own path. I definitely want to be unique. I don't want to follow in anyone else's footsteps. I want to do my own thing when I get there. So I'm not ever going to try to tell you that my way is the best way or my way is even the only way. I want you guys to carve your own paths as well. There are tons of people in my Discord who are winning tournaments that, while they may follow pieces of my research, they don't by any means follow everything that I say. And that's the best thing possible for you to do. Take everything that I give you with a grain of salt, put it all together in your salt shaker, and make a team that fits your play style with your local meta in mind so that you can be on top of your meta. My meta is totally different. That's why I chose different teams when I went to Tempest and when I went to Twilight. I chose different things because I expected different things. So, another thing is my subscriber battles. So this week, being sick as a dog for the last like 2 or 3 days, I literally had planned out both Tuesday and Wednesday as the 2 days to do that, but I kind of got sick and I literally could not get out of the bed without feeling like I was gonna die. So we will postpone that I really need to postpone it until next week, unfortunately. I hate to postpone it again and be so much later, but I have a ton of stuff going on in the personal life. I have a ton of stuff going on that really, really takes up a huge chunk of my time, unfortunately. But I think that's it. So if you're at all interested in joining the Discord and kind of just hanging out and shooting ideas off of each other and talking about things, especially if you want to get with me and maybe do some subscriber battles in the upcoming months for the different cups. I am extremely slow to open gifts. I'm very sorry. My main objective is to get Ultra Friends as quickly as possible with everybody that's close to it, and then work my way down the list from there, getting as many Ultra Friends as possible. After we get Ultra Friends, I honestly don't try to interact with you at all, because I don't want it to take away someone else's day to getting an Ultra Friend. Anyways, that is actually it. I'm rambling at this point. It's been a while since I've been on video, so I have too much to talk about, but thank you guys so much for understanding the short delay for you guys. It's been a huge delay for me. I've not actually recorded PvP content in like 7 or 8 days. Yeah, it's been a while. So anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. If you like to like videos, make sure you do that. If you don't, you can be that guy. Otherwise, I'm going to know what you have to say down in the comments below. Also, there's going to be a spreadsheet link and the Discord link in the description if you want to check those out. The spreadsheet is just a simple spreadsheet for how I rank the Pokemon, how I kind of got some numbers for all of these guys, and the Discord, of course, is to chit-chat with me and chit-chat with the community. So thank you guys so much. I will catch you in the next one.